I'm Joey.T.Cartoon.P, and you're watching a Cartoon editorial. Here's a topic I've wanted to talk about for a really long time. The topic of personality. You see, as much as I love animation, I also have a strong passion for psychology, one of which I hope to make into my full-time career, you know, if my professional opera career never gets off the ground. Yeah, so let's talk about some work that's been done on introversion. Introverts are identified as people who prefer spending time to themselves. It's derived from Carl Jung's personality types, where people get their thoughts, ideas, and energy from within. This is in contrast to the extrovert, who prefers to be around people, if not all the time. While an introvert could socialize and enjoy company, it's emotionally and physically draining to be in a large group of people. Taking work from Jung, researchers Myers and Brigg developed a test to see how people would fall on a personality spectrum, one side being introversion and the other extroversion. It would also include qualities like intuition and feeling that result in a neat 4-letter code. Many well-known figures have identified themselves as introverts, like Martin Luther King, J.K. Rowling, and Bill Gates. However, there are many misconceptions about being introverted. This includes being socially awkward, ignorant to others' feelings, and disadvantaged.
Introversion really does have all kinds of attributes to it, some real surprising powers to what it means to be an introvert. And yet this is not something we're mindful of. And instead what we do is we encourage introverts to act more like extroverts instead of acting like their best selves.
In recent years, research and literature published on introversion shows that it's a more common personality trait in our society. So much so that even in popular culture, movies and shows have embraced more introverted protagonists. This brings us to our subject for today's editorial, the 2013 animated hit Frozen. Not only was this the first Disney film in years where I gave two craps about the soundtrack, but I actually think they put a lot of thought into the personality of their characters. So much so that I think they were actively thinking about Jung's work in the process, while at the same time showing the struggle an introvert faces in an extroverted world. But before I begin, I would like to mention that this is not Disney's first time while attempting an introverted protagonist. When I used to think of a character that preferred her space, Belle from Beauty and the Beast came to mind. She always seemed to prefer her space and doing things on her own. She was also an abstract thinker and liked having time to herself. I even found the opening song to be interesting, which showed how other townfolk found her strange for not indulging in social activities. It was kind of like people trying to see if fit an extroverted ideal.
Look, there she goes, the girl is strange, no question. Can't you tell?
But for the most part, Disney seemed to prefer making their introverts the villains, the crazy madmen who worked in solitude and were cold and calculating. This is not the case for the character Elsa. She is royalty in the fictional town of Arendelle. She was born with the power of producing snow and ice to her will. However, when an accident causes her power, resulting in a younger sister getting hurt, her parents force her to hide her magic until she does something worse. Despite telling somebody to hide their emotions as being the worst advice given that her powers run on her emotions, another accident causes an eternal winter when she gets older. This becomes the film conflict that has to be resolved. A lot of controversy has surrounded Elsa's introversion qualities as a result of a mental illness, much like major depression or stress trauma-related illness inflicted by the childhood accident. While it's possible, I highly doubt it's the result of having a mental illness alone, especially since it seems Elsa was always introverted as a child prior to her sister's accident. It also brings about a concern most professionals have about introverts, which is people confusing common behavior with being a disease. There are moments in the film where it's suggested that her sister Anna thinks something's wrong with her.
Anna, what do you know about true love? Well, more than you. All you know is how to shut people out.
It was like the filmmakers understood that being an introvert can leave people feeling like they need to be cured of something. A scene like this, where the troll asks Elsa's parents if she was born this way or cursed, brought this thought to my mind. Elsa's powers are a metaphor to her emotional state and how she feels internally. Something of which Jung pointed out about introverts being people who gain their inspiration from a deep reflection or in privacy. This is also evident in the film when Elsa sings. Surprisingly, as many people love to sing to the tune of Let It Go, I like it because it reflects how comfortable Elsa feels to be finally alone. I think I find it more fascinating that she doesn't sing to a crowd or audience. It's after she runs off into the mountains and begins constructing her own solitary kingdom for an audience of one. Even the lyrics indicate how in her solitude she's able to have more control and time to think of a plan of action without the aid of somebody else. Just listen to these lyrics and you could see it for yourself.
It's funny how some distance makes everything seem small. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free.
People think this song is about abandoning your responsibilities, whereas I view it as a cry for independence and giving yourself some downtime to finally figure things out. In this scene where her sister tries to tell her that she's caused a massive storm, she doesn't directly face Anna and talk about what to do, she begins to walk off in the opposite direction and monologue while her sister's right next to her. This is some great character animation that perfectly reflects what she's thinking while cleverly making it seem subtle. Even when there's somebody around, the introvert would best find time to think of a plan to themselves. This is why I didn't find it surprising that Elsa didn't have too many lines in the film. Or at least she had more brief comments rather than rambling like her more extroverted sister. If anything, most of the dialogue was going on internally or in self-reflection, or her songs are like monologues she's thinking to herself. This is probably why the lead animator got into a lot of trouble while discussing the difficulty of animating women in this film. Whereas people took this as a misogynistic ideal that men are better to animate, what I think he was referring to specifically was how this particular character was harder to animate because she's not vocal and does most of her dialogue through her actions. And another thing I want to bring up is how she creates snow life. Interesting enough, I believe the original character conjured her own snow army. However, because being around many people would feel more like a distraction, creating one snow monster seemed more appropriate. I even find it funny how she doesn't intentionally create Olaf as a sentient being, but more like a subconscious action of reliving her childhood. Hell, she doesn't even know how he was able to talk when he first sees her.
And you're alive?
Yeah, I think so.
This brings us to two other characters that reflect the personality spectrum. Anna the extrovert, and Kristoff the ambivert. Yeah, that's the actual term. It means there's qualities of the introvert and extrovert. Don't look at me, I didn't create it. While Elsa's more the personal, more thoughtful and imaginative, Anna is the complete opposite. This is the perfect way to show how much of an introvert Elsa is, especially since Young also mentioned how the best couples tend to be the opposites since each one tries to complete one another. This point is still argued today, but holds kinda true in this film. Anna makes rash decisions, always keeping the conversation going if she doesn't even know what she's talking about, and often seems answers and ideas from other people, rather than from herself. In essence, she's the perfect extrovert to Elsa's introversion, showing how different both are in personality but common in sharing faults and difficulties. This is why it was cleverly balanced with the character Kristoff, the guy who does prefer some personal time to himself, but can work off of other people. If anything, it makes Kristoff the perfect character that can help identify between these two and their problems. He knows what it's like to want some time to think to themselves, while at the same time he knows when to take action. Also, is it weird that this movie has two actors from the first seasons of Glee? And this is what makes Frozen a fascinating little film to think about, probably more than actually watching it. I do think the film has its share of problems, and I do think it does fall back on Disney tropes and cliches while working against the film's favor. I did write a complete review on it at the Agony booth, which you could check out there. But what this film does perfectly is give us some well-developed, interesting, and relatable characters. This is probably why the film did so well with the general audience. It was perfectly balanced between the three characters that shared very common personality traits in today's society. Whereas you cannot identify with the choices the more extroverted Anna made, you had the more introverted character Elsa that wasn't a stereotype but an honest and well-thought ideal of people who prefer their downtime alone and get emotionally drained in big crowds. So today's question is going to be a little bit of an experiment. I want you to see if you could find the Myers-Briggs test and see what you identify on the personality spectrum. If you happen to be too lazy to take the test for yourself, you can go ahead and look up the chart. Now, I think you'd reap the benefits if you take the test, but that's just my opinion. Now, as far as what I identify when I take the personality test, it always seems to turn up as an INFJ. Now, I'm Joey.T.Cartoon.P, and thanks for watching this episode on the Cartoon Palooza.
love.